Here it is, the latest crap box owned by yours truly. And this one truly is a box. A 1989 Isuzu Trooper 2. If anyone's been following the channel, they would know in the last year I bought a Dodge Diplomat. Shortly after purchasing that car, I was broken into and most of my possessions were stolen. Then a bunch of stuff in my life piled up all at once. The now former Wookie Mobile Pathfinder had a catastrophic coolant system failure that sent me back a couple weeks, and then I moved out shortly after. The break-in was the second in a year and a half, and quite honestly, I needed a change in my life at that point. By the time I had settled down from the move, the race season had started once again. Then COVID hit, and everything shut down. I now had time to work on the Diplomat, but with everything shut down for the foreseeable future at the time, I couldn't set aside any money to put into that car. When racing did resume, it quite literally became a summer of hell, as we were racing as much as 4 times a week. Long story short, I had lost interest in the Diplomat when I'd finally had the time and money to sink into a project. Personally, it sucks coming to terms with that, as often you find yourself becoming a card hoarder, saying that you'll eventually get to that project. The Diplomat was a solid car, and I didn't want to see it crushed or destroyed. And luckily, I was able to find a buyer in Connecticut who was restoring it. So here lies my latest purchase, or mistake, however you feel the need to describe it. It's old, it's smelly, it's loud. And it's slow. So terribly slow. But the 1989 Isuzu Trooper 2 is a charming little SUV that harkens back to when SUVs were utilitarian off-roaders with no intentions of becoming family vehicles. The Isuzu story shares many similarities to that of Mitsubishi. Isuzu's story began in 1916 when the Ishikawajima Shipbuilding and Engineering Company decided to build automobiles. Their first cars were knockdown kit versions of cars originally built by the Worsley brand in Britain. The 15A9 1540 HP would become Japan's first passenger car in 1919. Following the devastating Kanto earthquake of 1923, the Japanese public realized the usefulness of cars, and soon the company would pivot to building trucks. In 1934, the country would be renamed Isuzu after the Isuzu River. This followed a previously established naming convention for the brand, as the original trucks were named for the Sumida River. Since the said Kanto earthquake, General Motors had a close working relationship with Isuzu. This relationship expanded in 1972 when GM bought 34% in Isuzu and introduced Isuzu's compact pickup as the Chevrolet Love in America in 1973. Isuzu also had a hand in developing GM's new global subcompact platform, the T platform, which provided Americans with the Chevette. Isuzu's own version of the subcompact, the Gemini, was sold in America as the Buick Opal by Isuzu, a complete mismatched combination of 3 separate brands sold in Buick dealers. In 1981, similarly to Mitsubishi and their partnership with Chrysler, Isuzu began offering cars under their own name in the States, as GM recognized the growth of fellow Japanese brands such as Honda and Toyota. The first model sold in the States as an Isuzu would be the compact pickup truck now known as the Pup. Chevrolet's Love would be replaced by its own model, the S10. Also gaining its own legs under the Isuzu brand would be the subcompact Buick Mashup, now known as the iMark. But another model would be introduced in 1981 as a 1982 model, and that would become arguably the brand's most famous model, the Trooper SUV. The Trooper is a utilitarian midsize SUV aimed towards Toyota Land Cruiser. It has a body-on-frame chassis, a solid rear axle, and an independent front suspension. The Trooper would become one of the early leaders in the exploded midsize SUV segment of the early 1980s. The big bobtail SUVs of the American makes, the Blazer, Bronco, and Ram Charger, were more enthusiast-oriented over the smaller yet more useful models like the four-door Trooper. Now families had a cooler option over a lowly mid-sized sedan or wagon. But a family SUV wasn't the intention of SUVs like the Trooper or the Mitsubishi Montero. They were still marketed towards enthusiasts, as these were very capable and rugged, but truck-like SUVs. The original Trooper was either available with a 2-liter 4-banger or a 2.2-liter diesel 4-cylinder. Both were vastly underpowered and struggled to move the vehicle's 3,700-pound curb weight. Over the course of the 1980s, the main focus was new and more powerful engines to try to make the Trooper more competitive with the exploded midsize SUV segment. The diesel engines were known for being weak and unreliable, and by 1989, they were replaced with GM's 2.8-liter V6. Another big thing that limited the Trooper to enthusiasts was the fact that until very late in its first-generation run, you could only get a Trooper with a 5-speed manual. Other models, such as the Jeep Cherokee and the Chevrolet S10 Blazer, had an available automatic, which made them much more friendly for those that used the small SUV as a daily driver. Adding to this was the difference between the Trooper and the Trooper 2. Trooper 2s were imported without rear seats, and they were installed in dealerships to get around import taxes. Other than that, I can't really find any difference between the models other than the distinction in the VIN numbers. The Trooper was a miserable on-road experience. Even back in the day, Warren Brown of the Washington Post made note of this in 1987. It wimps out. It gets passed by Jeeps and all other kinds of four-wheel drive competitors. Do you know what it's like to be laughed at by some twit dusting you off in a tiny, tinny, and significantly less expensive Suzuki Samurai? He even describes the on-road performance as milquetoast in his review, but he praises the comfort and off-road worthiness of the box on wheels. Isuzu realized all of the shortcomings of the original Trooper and aimed to fix them with the second-generation Trooper introduced in 1992. The styling was much more upscaled, the interior was much improved, the ride was much softer, and some much-needed power was under the hood. Gone was the gutless 4-bangers, and their place was a couple of V6s that finally gave the Trooper the power it deserved. Even looking at this generation, you could tell they aimed the Trooper squarely at the Land Cruiser. Now, I will admit, Troopers are no Land Cruisers. Land Cruisers are quite literally built to survive the African savanna for ages. No matter how good a Trooper may be, they do have their quirks, as most Isuzus do. They never sold quite as well, and that's why the nameplate didn't last past 2001 in America or internationally. Because of changing demographics, the replacements were aimed more towards being family haulers. Internationally got the unfortunately designed MU7, and America got the Chevrolet Trailblazer-based Extender. I bet you forgot that thing existed. Sales continued to flounder in America, and the brand was phased out by 2008. Now, finally, let's talk about my Trooper. My Trooper is a 1989 Isuzu Trooper 2. It has the 2.6-liter Ford ZE1 4-cylinder. This 4-banger produced a whopping 113 horsepower and 144 foot-pounds of torque when new. Remember, new. It's fuel-injected, which was a big deal for an SUV in 1989. Well, most SUVs by 1989 were fuel-injected, but it's still something that everyone would promote well into the 1990s. It's hooked up to Isuzu's MUA5C 5-speed manual, which shifts like the truck transmission that you would expect it to be. Of course, it feeds into an old-school 2-speed transfer case, which, when shifted into 4-wheel drive, splits power equally between the front and rear wheels. I am not gonna lie to you, it is slow, almost painfully slow, but it's charmingly slow. In the age where early SUVs are now nostalgically in demand, seeing a Trooper 2 on the road today is kind of a rare sight in the States. These things simply did not survive nearly as well as other period SUVs. They weren't produced in the numbers that the Jeeps and Fords and Chevys were, and they weren't expertly crafted like a Land Cruiser. Even Mitsubishi Monteros I feel survive better. Either the rust consumed most, and this one does have a bit of rust, or the lack of reliability tended to set in. Isuzu transmissions are notoriously known for being made out of glass, and the fact that this one has survived some hard years of ownership in the last few years is pretty amazing. How do I know that this thing's had some hard years? The fact that I bought it from a teenager in Statesville, North Carolina, and one of his friends saw me at a local car show and wanted to let me know that this trooper spits flames out of its tailpipes when you shift. Because, yeah, it pretty much has a straight pipe, and of course it does. Don't get me wrong, my trooper is far from being perfect. It needs a lot of work for me to comfortably drive it without fear of breaking down. It hasn't broken down on me yet, but I just don't have that faith in it quite yet. 30-year-old beat-up, cheap SUV. I made a couple of vlog videos detailing the quick detailing of the very nasty interior. The exhaust manifold is leaking badly. Only the speedometer works in the gauge cluster. I managed to shatter the passenger side smoker's window, and I'm fairly certain one of the rear hubs is going to need replacing soon. This isn't a show truck. What it is a frumpy toaster from days gone by, whose very existence on the city streets brings me joy. If you haven't gathered from my past ownership of a Dodge Diplomat and a Merkur XR4 Ti, I love 80s cars, especially terrible ones. So yeah, of course I love this thing. Expect this terrible old truck to get some much needed love on this channel in the near future. 1989 Isuzu Trooper 2. What happens when you design an 80s SUV entirely around being off-road worthy and not much else. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. This episode comes courtesy of me, as, yeah, this is my turd bucket. If you have a car or truck you'd like to see on the show and you happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, or at a reasonable driving distance from me, feel free to message the official Facebook page at facebook.com/WookieDrives. Be sure to follow my Twitter and Instagram at WookieAutomoTV for more Wookie shenanigans. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the show for more Wookie Drives like these. Finally, thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.
Right now, during Isuzu's Take It to the Bank sale, generous factory cash is helping people save big bucks that they can take straight to the bank.
Hi, I'd like to make a deposit. I love this bank. You never have to wait in line.
Right now, you could save big bucks on the Trooper during Isuzu's Take It to the Bank sale.